A few moments later, Diana entered the bedroom. She took a shower at Bill's, and Marty suggested that it was better for her to come back freshly washed rather than smelling like sex. "Could you help with the groceries, please?" "Are there really any products there?" Marty quipped, sitting down. "Yes, Marty. I told you I was going grocery shopping, and I went." Marty pulled the bags out of the car and dumped them on the counter. He noticed that there were no refrigerated or frozen foods. He also found a receipt, and the timestamp showed that she had left the grocery store almost 2 hours ago. "First I went shopping, and then I went to see Bill, as it turned out." Even though Marty knew this would happen, the evidence in front of him hurt. After putting his things away, Marty headed to the bedroom without saying another word. He wondered if he should even bring this up again. It really didn't make any sense. Diana made it clear what she intended to do, so the next step was his response. Something had to change. "Did you want to talk a little more?" asked his wife in a tone that said it wouldn't do any good. "No, Diana. You have made your position clear." Diana's expression and tone softened. She loved her husband and did not want to lose him. He was her best friend and the person she most enjoyed spending time with. She really didn't think that organizing her own sexual gratification, given the circumstances, should be a problem. And she hoped that Marty would eventually feel the same way. Diana nodded approvingly and headed to her closet to get dressed. She had thought about returning to some of the intimacy with her husband that she had been missing, but tonight was not that evening. By the time she changed for bed, Marty was already asleep, or at least he was good at pretending. The divorce did not go smoothly. Diana was furious when the papers were submitted. Marty was kind enough to send them home and made it a point to be with Dallas after moving into the guest room that was upstairs next to Dallas's room. Diana fought stubbornly against divorce. She hired a very aggressive lawyer, and he did everything possible. They even tried to declare him mentally incompetent, citing a suicide attempt. Marty, anticipating that she might try something similar, and because he thought it would be a good idea, entered counseling the same week the paperwork was filed. The psychologist he saw was reputable, and when he testified that Marty was definitely no longer at risk for suicide, the judge agreed. The fight could have gone on much longer, but just when Diana seemed about to step on his heels, Dallas intervened. She made it clear to her mother that they were wrong, that Diana's needs did not outweigh the vows and promises she had made. Life isn't always fair, and she had to be there for her husband and suffer by his side. Dallas also made it clear that any further resistance would damage their future mother-daughter relationship, possibly forever. Faced with the loss of both her husband and daughter, Diana felt she had no choice and abandoned her opposition to the divorce. The house was sold. Marty agreed to alimony for several years, knowing the judge would order it anyway. Diana rented an apartment with 2 bedrooms not far from her work, and I could work full-time 8 months after the divorce was final. But the divorce left her bitter, especially when Bill let her know they were over. It seemed like there were a couple more women he slept with, and Diana lost her attraction once she was no longer married. Dallas continued to attend college, alternately staying with both parents, although over time Diana began to play the victim and continued to blame Marty for the divorce. Once again, when Dallas heard her mother say, "If only he were more understanding," she yelled at her mother. "Did you think about Dad?" Marty walked into the dimly lit club around 10:00 p.m. It was Friday night, and he just wanted to get out of the house. He was just looking for a short-term pleasant pastime. He wanted to have a few drinks and maybe dance. He sat down at the bar and ordered a rum and coke. As he sipped his drink, he looked around the crowd and noticed a woman at the far end of the bar who looked familiar, but he couldn't quite place his finger on it. An almost empty glass of wine stood in front of her. Her hair was dark brown and long, and her dress barely covered her breasts. Marty looked at her closely and remembered. A small smile appeared on his lips as he took his drink and walked towards the woman. She looked at him just as he approached her. "Dr. Lassiter?" She looked into his eyes and studied his face for a moment, but did not immediately show any recognition, and Marty thought that perhaps he was mistaken. "I'm leaving Dr. Lassiter at the hospital. Here in the real world, I'm Vicky. but I'm afraid you're putting me at a disadvantage. It's been some time, and I'm sure that you communicate with many more patients than I do with excellent psychologists. I'm much better at names than faces. Test me. Martin Miller. Vicky considered the name for a minute, and Marty waited patiently for her to admit defeat. He watched her carefully, and if you had asked him later, he would have sworn that he actually saw how in her brain caught the fire bulb. Ah, Mr. Miller, an unfaithful wife and a rather sudden collision with a tree, if I'm not mistaken. You're not mistaken, and I'm amazed. We only spoke twice over a year ago. Hell, almost 2 years ago. It's luck. Don't want to join me? Marty sat down, motioning for the bartender to refill their glasses. Thank you. I'm pleased. So what brings you here tonight? Are you dating someone? Marty asked. I'm trying, Vicky replied, and the sparkle in her eyes made it clear what she meant. Really? I thought I remembered a rather impressive stone on your finger. Perhaps it was so. It wasn't long before my divorce was final. I wore my rings while trying to convince my ex-husband, that he really had nothing in common with a 20-year-old cashier other than wanting one of her friends to join them in bed. I'm afraid I didn't succeed. Oh my God, are they still together? This may come as a bit of a surprise to you, Mr. Miller, but after my divorce was finalized, I completely lost interest in Wayne's marital status. I don't have the slightest idea. Certainly, it was a stupid question, and please call me Marty or Martin or even an asshole. Anything but Mr. Miller. What did your wife call you? Marty. Well, Martin, could you take me to the dance floor? I will work. Martin asked the bartender to keep their drinks safe behind the bar, then took Vicky by the hand and led her to the dance floor. It was a fast dance, and they quickly fell into a rhythm. This song was followed by another fast song, and then a slower song began. They remained on the floor the entire time, snuggling together to the slow music. Vicky wrapped her arms around Martin's neck while his hands were pressed tightly to her back. Being a guy, Martin immediately noticed the lack of a bra. They looked into each other's eyes for a moment before Vicky laid her head on his shoulder. They still didn't let go of their embrace when the second song started. Martin was lost in the sensations of this beautiful, soft woman who smelled absolutely amazing. When the song ended, Vicky took advantage of the slight drop in the music volume to say a few words. Martin, I'm already tired of dancing, but I'm also very lonely, if you know what I mean, she whispered in his ear. How about you take me home and do something about it? Martin took her hand and walked back to the bar, paid the bill, and let the bartender know they didn't need any more drinks. He didn't seem surprised. She arrived at the club in an Uber, so they got into his car and Martin drove back to the apartment he bought. Vicky, maybe I'm asking this a little late, but how much did you drink? It was my first glass of wine at the bar when you walked up. What's the question? Because I don't take advantage of drunk women. Don't worry about it, Martin. They drove into his underground garage and took the elevator to his floor. Vicky hung on him all this time, and they managed to kiss passionately several times. As soon as the door closed, Vicky grabbed the hem of her dress and pulled it over her head. Oh my God, Vicky, you are stunning. Thank you, Martin. But what? Are you just going to watch? Oh, definitely not just to watch. Then show me your bedroom. Martin took her hand and led her down the corridor. Luckily, Dallas was visiting her mother that weekend. I hope you have condoms. Martin did have a small supply in his bedside drawer, and he pulled them out, placing them on the nightstand. They finally came to their senses after more than an hour of continuous and great sex. Martin was lying on his back. Vicky was lying on her left side and snuggled to him. They weren't quite asleep, but they were relaxed in that strange limbo between sleep and wakefulness. Martin felt rather than saw Vicky raise her head. Martin? I just remembered that there was a certain erectile dysfunction in this story. So, I was wondering if you would remember this. Wonderful. Obviously, this is no longer a problem. What's happened? A couple of months after the Oak incident, I started to feel, well, a tingling sensation, how shall I put it? This is what I imagine it will feel like when a paralyzed limb begins to recover. This went on for several weeks. Were you still married? What did you say to her? Officially still married, yes. But we have been living apart for several weeks. And no, I didn't say anything. It was none of her business. Over the next few months, I started getting morning erections more and more often, and even sometimes during the day. After 8 or 9 months, everything was pretty much back to normal. What did the doctors say? They didn't have an answer, at least not a serious one. They ran all sorts of tests and scans and compared them to the same ones I had when it wasn't working, and they couldn't point to anything. They ultimately attributed it to a quirk of the brain. They think hitting the tree solved the problem. They just don't know. Perhaps it was a tree, or perhaps it was a brain that had just completely healed. There's no way to know. Well, then I'm lucky. I guess it's okay if I stay the night. Well, are we going to have sex again in the morning and then have breakfast together? They settled down to sleep, but Martin had one more question. Vicky? Do you think you're ready for a serious relationship? There was a long pause, and Martin was afraid that he had made a mistake and scared her. He half expected her to get out of bed and ask for a ride home. There was no doubt about her attraction to him. And it's not just her physical beauty. She was smart, and he enjoyed her company. This, of course, was not love yet, but after the divorce, she was the first woman he seriously thought about. Can we talk about this in the morning? Certainly. Good night, Vicky. Good night, Martin. Vicky woke up before Martin. He looked peaceful, so she just let him sleep. She used his shower and then went to the kitchen to see what she could make for breakfast. Martin's question before going to bed took her by surprise. It wasn't that she wasn't attracted to him, but really she was just focused on having a good time. She had been telling herself for months that she didn't need a man in her life, and on some level, that was true. She had a good job and some great friends, so she didn't need a man. But if she was completely honest with herself, she really wanted it. But what will a decent guy say after she tells him the truth? Martin was awakened by the smell of something cooking. He stumbled into the kitchen to find that Vicky had used his shirt from last night and found the apron he kept in his closet. I was going to invite you to breakfast. It's too late now. You can invite me to lunch. Go quickly, receive a shower, and breakfast will be ready. 10 minutes later, Martin joined Vicky in the kitchen, just as she was setting up plates on the table. There was an omelet, a couple of sausages, and a piece of buttered toast. I didn't know I had sausages there. They were in the freezer. I hope it's edible. Martin took a bite and said it was delicious. Breakfast itself was relatively quiet, with Martin taking charge of cleaning the kitchen since Vicky had done him the courtesy of preparing the food. They chatted about nothing in particular until it was done, and when everything was put in the dishwasher, he turned to Vicky. Are you ready to talk? Mostly. Listen, Vicky, I don't want to put you in a difficult position or interfere in your affairs. If you're not interested in anything other than getting laid, then this is what it is. You don't owe me anything. I know. I just need to tell you something, and can we do it in the bedroom? I will be more comfortable there. They held hands and walked into the bedroom and sat on the bed facing each other. Vicky squeezed both Martin's hands tightly. Martin, I know that we really only met last night, at least in the real world. I think you're a great guy and I definitely like you, but there's something I need to tell you. I said that my husband left me for a 20-year-old girl, and it's true. But that's not the whole story. The main reason he left me is because I can't have children. He wanted children and went in search of someone who could give them to him. He didn't want to adopt a child. He viewed not having children of his own as a kind of failure, and I was the reason for it. And no, I really have no idea how he feels after the divorce. I'm over 40. I have an adult daughter. I wouldn't mind children, but that's not a barrier. Glad to hear that. Another thing I want you to know, well, at least I want to be honest, I'm not too proud of it. After the divorce was final, I felt pretty bad about myself. I was getting older and had just lost my husband to a woman almost half my age. I'm 37, if you're wondering. I'm interested, but in no case was I going to ask. They both chuckled slightly. I also felt, well, unfinished, I guess is the best word. To tell the truth, I didn't feel like a woman at all. How can you be a woman and not be able to have children? I know what you're thinking, but that's exactly how I felt at the time. So I decided to prove that I am a woman. And if I couldn't be a woman having children, then I was going to be a woman satisfying men. Mostly anonymous, but there were a lot of them. I called myself Angela and never refused to go home with someone when I wanted. This went on for several months until I realized that this was self-destructive behavior and started seeing a therapist. Even then, I continued to do it, albeit less frequently, until I finally reached a point in my life where I could stop. "Isn't that what you were doing last night?" Martin asked carefully. He didn't judge and didn't want her to think so, but last night she was a cougar on the hunt. There was no doubt about it. Yes, it was so. I have needs as a woman and I sometimes go out to satisfy them. But if before I usually left with the one who called me first, now I am selective about who I choose. There were many nights when I came home alone and, took care of everything myself. I guess I should be glad I passed the test. Of course, Martin, I really enjoy spending time with you, and to answer your question, I would really like to explore more, but I want to be honest about what I've experienced. I actually checked and luckily didn't catch anything, which was incredibly lucky. I don't need birth control, but I can get a note from my doctor if you need proof. Assuming you're willing to try, I'd like us both to get tested and agree to be exclusive. Martin sat in silence for several minutes. Vicky waited restlessly but patiently. Finally, he was ready to answer. "Vicky, thank you for your honesty. I know it was very difficult. I think I owe you the same. Our experience is not too different. After my divorce, I was glad I went through with it, but felt depressed about my inability. I had no idea how I would ever have a woman, and I faced the prospect of living completely alone. My therapist pointed out that as we get older, many women lose interest in sexual intercourse and prefer non-sexual affection. I thought I would have to find a woman much older than me or wait a few years. When I started getting an erection again, and even when it seemed like everything was back to normal, I wasn't in the best condition. And just as you felt that you needed to prove that you were a woman, I felt that I needed to prove that I was a man. I went out a lot to find women to bed, proving, at least in my mind, what a stud I was. I was no more picky than you. Some women were kind of like, well, let's just say I've ridden a few city bikes and turned a lot of city door handles. This went on for a while, and I wasn't as lucky as you. I was woken up by an attack of gonorrhea, plus having to admit to my doctor that I had no idea what my sexual partners' names were. We cleared everything up, and during therapy, I began to focus on my behavior. It's been a long time since I've been with a woman without protection, but I'm happy to be tested, and I have no problem being exclusive. So, are we going to try it? You and me? Vicky asked, blinking her eyes and knowing the answer. I bet it is. Martin answered this rhetorical question. Martin's supply of condoms was exhausted by lunchtime. The almost inevitable confrontation with Diana occurred after Martin and Vicky had been dating for about 3 months. Their relationship was very strong, and Vicky and Dallas got along well. Martin and Vicky had their own houses, but they spent every night together, and it seemed they were getting married. They went to a club aimed at a more mature crowd. There was a DJ playing music, and the interiors were designed to separate the dance floor from the tables, allowing for real conversation. Martin and Vicky enjoyed their drinks and chatted about this and that. The evening was going well, so Vicky was taken aback when Martin's smile suddenly disappeared and his eyes looked past her. She followed his gaze. Martin and Diana saw each other almost at the same time. While Martin's face became neutral, Diana's face showed a grin as she walked towards the table. Diana remained bitter after the divorce, even after all this time. She still believed that she hadn't actually done anything wrong, except perhaps for lack of discretion. But satisfying her sexual needs with another man when her husband was not up to the task was definitely not on the list of things that were done wrong. So when she approached the table, her intention was not to be nice. "Marty, how nice to see you," Diana said in a voice that made it clear that she was being sarcastic. "Diana!" Vicky, this is my ex-wife, Diana. Diana, this is Vicky, Martin said, introducing her, although he would have preferred not to. Nice to meet you, Diana. I've heard a lot about you. Well, I've heard absolutely nothing about you, Diana answered bitterly. We are divorced, Diana. It's been over a year now. My life is no longer your business. Now, if you don't mind... Martin left the line hanging, but the implication was that he was clearly inviting his ex-wife to leave them alone. Oh, of course, Martin. I wouldn't want to disturb your date. But, Vicky, there is something I need to tell you. And what could it be? Vicky asked, glancing at Martin before looking back at Diana. You probably won't want to mess with him. We got divorced because he couldn't do it anymore. Martin watched Vicky carefully, waiting for her answer, and Vicky moved to suppress a quiet giggle. She asked Martin, raising her eyebrows, "This is true? I don't think you mentioned this." Martin just shrugged. It was Vicky's game. Diana thought she had them in her hands, that she had thrown a monkey wrench into Marty's relationship like he had done with her and Bill. She was going to enjoy this, however, her happiness was short-lived. That's good then, because if that thing I was bouncing on last night wasn't aroused, then a real erection would probably kill me. Diana's smile immediately disappeared. Vicky and Martin exchanged glances that slightly mocked Diana's sad attempt to come between them, and Diana simply looked confused. Wait, what is she talking about, Marty? You don't mean to say that the damn thing works, do you? It seems that during rare meetings, Dallas did not inform her mother about Martin's personal life. Like a champion, Diana, just as good as always. But how is this possible? Have doctors found a cure? Martin and Vicky were silent, allowing Diana to get even more excited. Come on, Marty, this problem ended my marriage. I think I at least deserve to know what was wrong. The smile disappeared from Martin's face. First of all, Diana, it was your behavior that ended our marriage, not my condition. You made the choice to do what you did, not me. Secondly, you don't deserve shit. We are divorced, and my affairs are just my affairs. Come on, Marty. You can blame my choices all you want, and I can't say you're wrong, but I wouldn't do this if everything was normal. Okay, Diana. It just happened. The doctors think that whatever the problem was after I had that first accident, it just needed time to recover. If you had been patient and stayed with me through my illness like our vows said, we would still be married. Diana's mouth dropped open as she tried to think of what to say. This information shocked her. I cannot believe this. God must really hate me. He just wants to believe the vows, Martin muttered. What was it? Diana asked, her eyes sparkling. Nothing. Nothing at all. So, now you know. Could you please leave us for the rest of our evening? Diana stood thoughtfully for about 30 seconds, then looked Martin in the eyes. You're right, Marty. I'm sorry I was wrong to do what I did. I was short-sighted and selfish. I should have been stronger. I ruined a good marriage. I'm really sorry. Diana turned and left, not only from their table but also from the club itself. Martin and Vicky watched her go until she was out of sight, actually feeling sorry for her. Martin then turned back to Vicky. Let's dance, my love. 6 months later, Martin and Vicky got married. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.